Hey everyone, welcome to the Gaslit Truth Podcast. We have a special episode today. We've got three fantastic women sitting in front of these cameras right now. So you better get your ass on YouTube so you can see how great we all look. Okay, if you haven't yet. I am therapist Jen, one of your hosts, here with my co-host in black.
Dr. Tara Lynn.
We are
right
going
here.
for this black thing. We have
Yes, we are.
decided that we look good if we wear black because most of the guests that we have often have a color on of some
Yeah.
sorts that's not black. It just keeps happening
Right?
that way, right? So we're like, we just have to stay dark like our souls and our coffee, and then our guests, right? Like they always
Can
seem to
bring
bring
the
some colors.
sunshine. Welcome, AK Dozanti, first responder wellness coach and specialist. And she is going to go ahead and introduce herself further.
Yeah, she is.
Because we determined earlier that we are three control freaks and she wanted to control this part. So
Yes.
we're going to let her do
We're
it.
gonna allow that.
We're going to
shit.
let her do it. Go ahead.
Well, thank you for entertaining my control freak nature. I do have to say, I usually wear black, and the fact
Oh,
that I'm wearing blue and y'all are on either side of me, and this
It
is
is
like
the sandwich.
it's a thin blue line.
it is.
Oh
It's
my
very
God. Are you
Isn't that so funny?
my God.
I was
Just
waiting.
saying.
Oh, oh my
Just
God.
saying. I started my law enforcement career when I was 19 years old. Did some undercover online investigations for a couple of years, became a deputy sheriff after I finished my undergrad. And I did that for a few years. And then in 2015, I went from being officer of the year to a very crispy burnout. I was experiencing severe depression, PTS, suicidal ideation, adrenal fatigue. It was like I was just fried. So then I became a criminal court victim advocate for a few years. I went back and got my master's degree in criminology and with a concentration in victimology. And I started learning about trauma. And I was like, hold on a second here. There's way too many similarities happening. So I also went back and became a yoga teacher. So I did a 10-month teacher training and just dove into all kinds of different certificates and stuff because, well, burnout. And I didn't allow myself to slow down. I was trying to heal myself. And what I realized though in 2020 was that I needed to take a break, like a real break, for real. Left that job. And then I formed Lifesaver Wellness. So I took all of those things that I learned to heal myself. And now I'm helping first responders by coaching individuals and training all over the country and speaking at conferences and stuff. So
Love this.
Yeah.
I love this for so many reasons. And I know Jen, she's going to get into it too, but we both worked for the Department of Corrections. And my father was in law enforcement from the time I was a baby all the way through his retirement, and then worked in federal government for a while. And now my son is in policing as well. So this is a very valuable topic for me, and I think I'm probably gonna cry at some point, I don't know, but, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. So, the thin blue line resonates well with me. I have tremendous respect for anyone who is in, policing or 911 or first responders, fire, all of the things, and DOC people too. So if I missed a category, I'm so sorry. It's early. But yeah, so I'm so appreciative of this conversation. I want to talk about crispy burnout. Yeah, what does crispy burnout look like for
Yeah.
you?
What was it for you?
So there was in hindsight, a downward spiral that happened. It seemed to happen slowly, but for me, I was in denial and denial and denial, and then it smacked me in the face. And I think that that's the case for a lot of people. But for me, I developed some serious compassion fatigue. I was just completely apathetic. I didn't care what your problem was. It wasn't mine. I had enough problems, right? I had severe brain fog. I was having trouble writing even the simplest of reports, like a lockout, like somebody locks their keys in their car, and then I have to go jimmy it and get it.
Yeah.
It's a 2, maybe 3 sentence report, and I had so much trouble even like honing in on that, right? I was extremely forgetful. I, at one point, forgot my duty belt, got all
Mm.
the way to the station and was like, I
That's kind of
don't,
a big thing to
I
forget,
don't,
is it?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. It was pretty embarrassing to walk up to my sergeant and be like, I gotta go home real quick.
forgot the most important part of my
Right.
uniform.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes. Um, and so it just became like every facet of my life just became increasingly more difficult. But for me, the worst part of it was I was waking up every single morning wishing that I hadn't. And that was rough. I started noticing that I was purposely not wearing my seatbelt and just playing Russian roulette, driving hot to calls. Like, hot means lights and sirens. And yeah, and everything was just becoming increasingly more difficult. And I realized that it was either going to be me or the job. And it was a tough decision, but I chose me. So.
God damn,
Oh,
that
man.
is the most familiar story for both Jen and I, right?
Yeah, we are all kind of in the exact same space. And
Yes. The way we got here was making that decision. It's
yep,
either going to be me or the job.
you're the job.
Yeah.
And yeah, but that is like the most difficult yet most courageous decision anybody could make for themselves. And it shines this light on, I'm just going to bring this in, mental health, your mental health. The solution is not going to be found in the bottom of a pill bottle, or in your industry a lot in the bottom of an alcohol bottle, because that happens a lot. It's not going to be found there. It's going to be found in making those big decisions, for your life, which is very hard when you are in the middle of crispy burnout, because making any decision, the decision to put your work belt on was too much of a decision,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the idea of thinking like, I need to leave this thing that's causing me, a very slow, drawn out death, essentially, but I don't have the energy to think about what to do on the other side.
Right.
Right? Especially when you're thinking about, real type A drivers, right? Like there has to be a plan. It's not enough to be like, just trust the process. What
Right.
people
Yeah,
told me,
that seems
trust the
almost
process.
impossible.
Yes. And this is my response to when people say, well, you just need to trust the process. And I look people dead in the face and go, fuck the process. Like,
The whole idea of not being able to step away from something and, like making that decision to step
yeah.
away, and the feedback that you get from people is not supportive. Many people do not, they do not support it. And it's this idea of, but this is the thing. This is the sure thing. This is the retirement. This is all the benefits. These are all the things. And I just giggle to myself, like, do you really think I would have made it to retirement?
Right.
Well, I would not have, if I would have made it there, had I not made the decision to step away that I did, I wouldn't have enjoyed any of it. And in fact, I don't really know if I would have known what to do with myself at that point, because I would have been too far gone.
Mhm.
And then removed the only thing that defined me that was left in my life. And now I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
And in
I
our industry, there's the DOJ actually put out statistics that there's, um, for first responders, they only end up living an
Yep.
average of 5 years
5 years.
after retirement. So
Five.
you work all that time,
Yep.
you're miserable, and you're like, oh, retirement's going to be a redo.
Yep.
And it's
No,
not.
it's not.
It's not, because you've wrecked your body, you've wrecked your brain, and I'm not saying that's the case for everyone. I don't want to totally
Mhm.
generalize, but in many cases, you've put your entire life and identity and everything into this job, and then when it goes away, you're like
You're lost.
melting into the walls,
Yeah, you're
and
you're lost.
your body can't keep up with that cortisol that you had been pumping out for
Mhm.
years and years and years, and then it doesn't know
Mhm.
what to do.
Yeah.
I wanna say that just for our listeners now, I could be overgeneralizing, but many people in the first responder community, all the first response groups that I mentioned before, often get an earlier retirement than most people. So we're not looking at people who retire at 65 or 67 and die 5 years after. We're looking at people who are retiring at 55,
Yep.
my age, and
Yep.
dying at 60,
Yes.
or even younger. So
Mhm.
I think that's important to mention because that is a very earlier retirement than what we seem to be typical, and very young people,
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
that have taken this large toll.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring in an idea here. So I don't know if you've read the news lately. We're in Wisconsin, and there was a big news article about what happened at one of our biggest maximum security prisons, Waupun Correctional. Um, there was a lot of, we'll just call it some criminal behavior and things going on from top down, right, Jen?
Top down. Yep.
Yeah, top down. And it makes me curious if that stuff is, obviously it's bad decisions, but if it's a result of burnout on some levels, just the not caring and the way that we treat people in
Yes.
an uncaring way, or in a punitive way, or just a dismissive way. Because I can recall, working in the prison and seeing some people that would dismiss a lot of things that were going on, especially health related concerns of other people, and just like, man, I don't care, like that kind of stuff. I think that's probably, well, unless you're a super criminal, that's probably a, big sign of burnout, when you begin to treat people in a very cavalier, negative way, which could be yourself, your coworkers, or the people that you're actually trying to care for. And I'm going to say we do care for everybody in these jobs, whether
Yeah.
you're arresting somebody, you still have to care for them, in certain ways. So,
Yeah, and I think that's the problem is, you come in and I there's like the 12 stages of burnout. I think it's
Yep.
Herbert Freudenberger. I'm not sure if I said that right, but you start off really gung ho and you've got this massive heart and that's why you're in it, to help people, right? And then slowly, you start to neglect your own needs. And
mhm,
so your stress boiler, just kind of bubbles over and
Mm.
you don't have any more space or capacity to deal with anybody else's issues. So they just get dismissed, right? They just
Mhm.
roll off.
Yeah.
And I think that that is a major part of burnout, and it almost becomes like within the industry like a
Yes.
generational trauma,
Yes.
because it just, like, I mean, they say shit rolls downhill. They just keeps going. And
Mhm.
that is why, we're on the cusp right now, I think, in the first responder world of making this really big paradigm shift and making mental wellness a priority. And so the guys that are in middle management right now are not, I hope, not ever going to experience a time from this time out where mental wellness isn't a priority. So when they become the top management,
Yeah.
hopefully it's not shit that's rolling downhill anymore.
So, how are these places putting mental health as a priority? And this is in this world, because it's very male dominated. Okay, it's a very male dominated world. Um, I think this is one of the spaces where mental health stigma is huge, with men, right? In particular, like boys don't cry, that kind of stuff, suck it up, whatever. How are you addressing, or how do you think that these communities are addressing that type of stigma to get men in to get the help that they need? Because here's the thing, when you are in burnout or you've had lots of trauma, you don't realize it. It just becomes part of your day
Yep.
to day, right? So you have no idea. This is just part of the job. My dad would say this all the time. He's like, "Well, I don't know. It's just part of the job." Like, I mean, he was in Vietnam when he was 18 years old, right? His first tour of duty. When he did that, he served two tours between 18 and 20, I believe. He was there twice. And then he came out and became a well, first of all, in between that and policing, he was off the chain gang, like beating people up, like doing all this shit. I'm surprised he wasn't in jail. But anyway, he turned into a police officer. Surprise! Anyhow, but he would ask. He legitimately would
Oh.
ask, because there was some other guys on the department that would go through some very traumatic things. Now, here's the thing: you guys go through traumatic things every day, right? But even your level of what is traumatic,
Mhm.
versus what's just normal, I'm air quoting for those of you looking on YouTube or not, what is normal. He would have colleagues that would, he would say like, I don't know why they lost their shit essentially, like a traumatic event would happen. One person loses it and the other person doesn't. He's like, I don't know. I just feel like it's just part of the job. And I'm like, oh my God, are you dissociating?
Yes.
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 Survive.
To survive.
Right.
Yep.
To survive.
Exactly.
Yep. Mhm.
So to answer your question, I think a lot of what we've seen, at least in the last few years, these ideas of like resilience and you got to stay motivated and set goals and like,
Mhm.
that's very surface stuff. And that stuff's been around for a decade or more. But I think in the last few years is what we're realizing or what we're seeing is people really turning up the volume on these conversations. And they're really starting to dial in on, the education of what's underneath the resilience, what's underneath, your kind of, so basically it's exploring like your neurobiology and teaching them about, breathing techniques and why it works. Cause if you tell a cop, you just got to breathe, they're going to be like, yeah, F you. I like haven't been able to breathe for 15 years. I got this vest on,
Right.
chain smoking and all the things, but
Right.
but if you say, here's your sympathetic nervous system, here's your parasympathetic nervous system,
Little
this is what this one
education.
does, this is
Mhm.
what this one does. And when you breathe, you get to pump the brakes, you get to take your power back, you get to put yourself back into control. And then they go, oh, so, control freak
Mhm.
takes one to know one.
Yes.
You give them that empowerment through that knowledge, and then it starts to click. And then they're like,
Yeah.
okay, I could probably try that. So I think what's happening is just more conversation, deeper conversation, and a better understanding. And I think, people are opening up more and more. And it's almost like a little, forgive me, but a little extra Me Too movement, because it's like, oh, you felt like shit after that too?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
not alone. And
Yes.
Yeah.
then, it continues
Or
on from
wait,
there.
you felt numb after that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too. Like, I didn't feel anything. Like, did you like, is that normal?
Yeah.
Yes.
To not feel?
It's
Mhm.
such an archaic process too of like, and I can only speak for the prison system, right? And having worked there for almost 15 years. Part of my stay in prison was as a psych, and I was working as a mental health professional. And then the latter half of my stay was as a supervisor. So I spent a significant amount of time overseeing sergeants and the officers and even captains. And the role that I was in was being on call and having to make big decisions for the institutions at just short of the hand of the warden. These are kind of the tiers. And something that would happen is I really disliked thing that I really, really disliked is when we would do some kind of an after action review. Okay.
Mm.
Or we would have an event that would occur and it would be very significant. Whether it would be an inmate who was harming themselves or a fight that had just occurred, or we were taking an inmate down and having to get them into a restraints, right, and have to restrain them. And one of the things that would always happen when we were done, right, for those of you who don't have quite much of a knowledge of this, is when you get done with a big event such as that, when body cams came into play for us in the prison system, which was really only like in the last couple years, that became something where we would have the ability to see some of the footage and look at things. But regardless of the years that went by, one of the things that we've always done is you're doing a wellness check when everybody's done. And you do a quick debrief with every single event that uses any form of force at all. And here's me, and I'm experiencing this with all of my staff, my officers, my sergeants, the captain is there, and we're videoing everything. And we're going through and doing a quick debrief. Okay. And then that debrief usually would get utilized in an after action review if it would have been a huge event, right? And it's, are you good? 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 And you can see this on camera. It's on literally on camera. And we've been doing this for years, right? Are you good? Yeah, I'm okay. Everybody okay? You're okay. I'm okay. Everybody's okay. Okay. Now that's always the quick start, which literally happens within 5 minutes after an event, right? Where your adrenaline is through the roof. You're
But
in
what would
front of
happen? Wait,
you're in front of 10 peers,
I was gonna
and you're
say,
not
what
going to
would
be the
happen if you said I'm
person.
not good?
Correct. And you're not
Yeah.
going to be the person that stands there and says, I'm not
Nope, not
okay.
good.
And
Right.
for me, coming from the psych field, then becoming a supervisor, I would stand there and watch this because these are all my staff. And I'm like, holy shit. Wait, this is what you guys do? What? Okay, so all right, so I'm trying to understand it. Now, I'm also keeping this very simple for the conversation because did we have peer support services that would occur afterwards? Yes, but they fell short in so many areas. Okay. And that's for probably not for this podcast unless you get into that, AK, because you might, because this happens in your field as well. Okay. We had all those services, right? And we'd have somebody check in later, right? But it would fizzle. Okay. But this idea of are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? And I stood there and I'm like, everything gets videoed. I'm like, are we just trying to cover our asses right now? Like
Yes.
what's happening? Okay.
I'm
Yes.
just gonna answer
Okay.
that shortly. Yes.
I know. And I would watch this and I'm thinking, okay, well, God, I hope what's the follow-up look like? Because in this moment, it's an arbitrary ass question because everybody is trying to just manage what is happening inside themselves. And what do? We get quiet and small. And then we get to business. And we go through the timeline. Okay, at 9:02 this happened, at 9:06 this happened, at 9:09 this happened, and everybody does their piece, right? When the timeline's going, and it's this robotic process where you are taught to just you're calm, everything goes. No wonder we dissociate. I dissociated so much to be able to do that process, but then I never came back to it. I didn't do the circle back for myself. And even when people could check in later. And so that's for those of you that maybe don't have awareness of some of this, when you're working as a first responder, there are these processes that you go through. In corrections, that was the first one. Everybody on camera, is everybody okay? And now we're going to go through and bullet all the minutes that just occurred and the whole timeline. We're going to video all of it. And then when you get done, there's a lot of attaboys. There's a lot of, oh my God, you did a great job with that. Like, oh my God, that, and then you almost glorify what you did.
Mhm.
And it was very disturbing to me as a therapist, then becoming a supervisor, watching this happen. I'm like, does anybody not realize what's going to happen to all of us? Like, if we're not careful.
Yeah.
So I don't know what your
So
thoughts are on that. And I just
have
kind of
so
really went
many
on a
thoughts.
tangent. I just really went on
I
a
was
tangent
riveted. It
there.
was a riveting.
No,
But
yes,
we're talking
you really
about
painted
fatigue.
a
And
beautiful
I mean, that's
picture
what
of the gray
happened, at least.
walls. And
Yes. I mean,
Yeah.
this is what the process was.
yeah,
And I was,
yeah,
it scared the shit out of me. Cause it's like, I can't unknow what I know on this other side of the world of this. Like,
yeah, right.
so
And well, it's like I'm sure for you, it was like watching a train wreck because you can see what the fallout's going to be, but you can't stop it.
yeah. Like I want to just
Um,
go hug somebody because I can see they're
right.
ready. Like we're in this circle and they're ready
Uh-huh.
to, in that cusp of just, okay, it's okay. You can let it out. It's all right. Whatever happens in this moment, but you're going to be fucking stoic. You
Yeah.
are going to be stoic
I
in
mean,
this moment.
and so I actually had a similar, I had one supervisor that would do that because he was military and he thought he was cool. So he, but he would go around the squad room. Are you good? Are you good? Are you good? And
Yeah.
he did this one time and it wasn't roll call. This was shift change.
Okay.
And he did it in the middle of, uh, the shift change. I was in the middle of a conversation with somebody about, we had both dealt with the same
Yes.
person
Yep.
in a similar time span.
Yeah.
And everybody else, you good? You good? You good? And he got to me and he said, you good? And I said, yeah. And my maiden name's Dyer. And he said, Dyer, are you good? And he started like screaming at me
Yeah.
in the squad room. And I was like, yeah. I answered just like everybody else. And he's like, in my office right now. So that was like a whole big
Yeah.
mess. And I didn't even know. I just kind of looked at him like, are you serious right now?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what's happening. But
Yep.
the issue I take with, the beautiful brick walled picture that you just
Yeah,
painted
thank
for
you.
us.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Took me back. It was great.
It's yes,
I could
it's a
tell,
leading
actually.
right. It's a leading question.
Oh, yeah.
You're telling them what you want them to say.
Yes.
You
Are you
want them to
good?
say you're
Mhm.
good because you don't want to deal with the rest of it. It's not a
Yeah.
how do you feel
Yes.
Right.
because that would sound too soft.
Yes.
It's not an open-ended question because they don't really want to know. They
Yeah.
want you to say you're good. And then you go into, I mean, and when you start to really think about like the brain science behind it, you're still in fight or flight. You're still
Correct.
activate. Your
Yes.
brainstem is still just lit
On
completely
fire.
up.
Mhm.
And then you're like, oh, let's jump to the prefrontal cortex and try to find words.
Yes.
Let's just get out of that
And
immediately.
you have to, right? Because that's the next
Yes.
part of the process, right? Is after
Yeah,
you put your words out and your timeline out, then what do you go do? Then you're put in a room to go write your reports.
exactly. Yeah. And
I
that's
want to
where,
just I want to add one small thing. So when your adrenaline is pumping, number one, it feels good. So are you good? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
I
you're
am great.
oh
Like
my God,
this
that was
is
so great how you took that inmate. I can't believe you just did that. You took him down and it is, it's this, you're, and then you,
but that's
you get
exactly
closer.
but
Yeah.
that's
Your
exactly
buddies,
when your
your,
prefrontal cortex will
yep.
shut off. That's
Yes.
when adrenaline pumps, your thinking brain shuts off. And
Yep.
that's when you say and do things you wish you wouldn't have said and done. And that's also when you can't access words very
Yep.
well. So, yes or no, sure, I can access that. I'm going to choose yes because damn, I've got all these great chemicals flowing through my body right now and I've got
Yeah.
camaraderie and we all just went through this thing
Yep. You
together
did.
and yep, I'm good. I'm good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
You know?
and I think that's an interesting part about for the first responder world is you're in fight or flight, and you also, like, as a law enforcement officer, you might be fighting for your life, and at the same time you're thinking, do I have enough elements of the crime to be even making this arrest right now? So
Yes.
Right.
you're toggling back and forth,
Yep.
and it's no wonder that your emotional brain's like, "Pff, I'm out."
Yeah.
Like,
Peace out, bitches.
Yeah.
right,
It is.
right.
It is.
And so it's really important to be able to educate these guys on what's going on in the moment, because that cortisol, the adrenaline, all of those stress chemicals
Yeah.
feels a lot like dopamine.
Yep.
And so it might make you feel really alive in the moment, but it's taking years off of your life in the long run.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, when people hear that, they go, oh, I just thought, it
Yeah.
was this is just my job and I
This
just
is
find
what
a
I do.
really
This
great
is
sense
what
of
we
purpose
do.
from it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like,
Mhm.
This is
yes,
what
all
we do.
those things are true, and
Yeah.
it's wrecking your heart and your brain and your other bodily functions.
I want to just talk a little bit about resilience too, because I know you mentioned that word. Resilience, the interpretation of that is really just, pull yourself up from the bootstraps and do it again. That
Yeah.
is not actually what resilience is, right?
Thank you so
There's
much for saying
yeah,
this.
yes. I mean, at its basic, resilience is the ability to bounce back from something, but it's because you have certain protective factors
Right.
in place that you can
Yeah.
exercise more resilience. And we miss the protective factors. Like we just say it's jump over all the emotions and do it again. And then your resilience, because you're doing it again. You're showing up over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I think if we work on building more resiliency factors for people, not just first responders, but everybody, building resilience factors on the front end that we might not have as much of this on the back end because we're chasing mental health at this point. People dive down a rabbit hole and we're trying to pull them back out,
Yes.
and instead of front loading people and letting them know what resiliency factors are. I mean, to be able to do breath work at the end of a shift or at the end of an event, to sit down and do breath work, and that's an okay thing to do. That's the
Mhm.
expected thing to do. That alone could change so much for so many people in that transition, getting your brain back and letting your body know that it's not under fight or flight anymore. The bear is not chasing you. That could be one thing that someone could do to enhance their resiliency,
Yeah.
So, but instead we'll go home and we'll drink a beer, or something like that,
Yeah.
Or
right?
10.
Or 10 to calm our bodies down,
Yeah.
Yeah.
to do that. I distinctly remember my dad when he was younger. I mean, there was a lot of drinking, right?
Yeah.
At certain points of his career, not all the time, but when he was younger, particularly, because they would all go out together and then they would, redo war stories, right? So it was a constant re-engaging in
Mhm.
that stressful thing and drinking and camaraderie and all of that and turning away from your family. right?
Mhm.
So you're turning away from your supports. Your supports are also a resiliency factor, you guys. Like that,
Yes.
those people are also, they also help contribute to your resiliency, right?
Yeah.
So how you engage with your community, right? So it's a very interesting conversation on many, many, many levels.
Yeah.
And I've worked with many people that are police. I haven't worked with too many firefighters, to be honest, but I've worked with people in DOC and I've worked with 911 operators, and the stories are all the same. But the one people that I think need to be involved in this are also social workers and mental health therapists, because we also do a shit job of dealing with our own trauma.
Oh
We
my
don't
gosh.
take care of ourselves, and we're not part of these conversations. We're not part of the, first responder conversations, though we are present. We're present
Mhm.
and embedded in a lot of these places. We're present and embedded in police departments now.
Mm-hmm.
So we are present and embedded in many places. And just because like a 911 operator, we don't, well, in prison I did see a lot of trauma, but mostly we don't see trauma in real time. We just listen to it all day long. We listen to
Yeah.
it all day long, year upon year upon year. The amount of, secondary trauma, we'll call it. But working in the DOC, primary trauma, like, I saw some shit that is not normal, that scarred me for life, you know?
Yeah. And I would say that was a big eye opener for me going into being a criminal court victim advocate is
Mhm.
I didn't realize, I was knee deep in it all the time when I was in uniform. And then I came into the other side of it and I was like, oh, it didn't go away. It just looks different now.
Yeah, it's just
And
the other side of the road. Yeah.
exactly. And so that
Yeah.
was really a big eye opener for me too, because I was like, I felt that it was still weighing me down.
Mhm.
Um, but in a different way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. It needs to be a broader conversation,
Mhm.
and I think it's starting to be for sure. But back to your point on resilience, I am so glad you said that because there are so many classes and courses for first responders that it's like first responder resilience, and I'm like, that's
Yeah, I used
great,
to
but
teach that
like
shit.
it's
It's
yes,
horrible.
and and
It's not okay.
and you know what? Like at the time, it was probably revolutionary,
Yes,
right?
yes, it was, and I was just gonna add that here. I, like, say these bold statements, right? And,
Yeah,
like, at the time,
but
that's what we knew, right? Like, we only
yes,
knew what we knew 10 years ago when I was teaching
Mhm.
that because it's something that we were giving
right.
to our staff and that I was trained in.
What did you teach that was so bullshit? I wanna know, like.
Well, what resiliency was framed as. Resiliency equated to Gen X thinking. If
Mhm.
you're
Yeah,
not bleeding from the head, you're fine. Set another goal, go higher, do more. Like that's my
Bootstrap.
my like that's
Mhm.
my parallel to it, right? Is like the
Yeah.
Gen Xer, like the way you're raised as the Gen
yeah,
Xer, right? Like
Yeah.
which there isn't bad pieces to it, right? Like we do
Right.
need to sometimes be given a little bit of a push because we have it in us. Okay, I don't want to negate and take that away, but it was really framed as that
Mhm.
is that you have the tools inside of you. You just keep going because you can.
but by the way, that kind of gaslights the shit out of people if they're not able to drum up these tools,
Exactly.
Right.
The
and
whole
that's where
thing
yeah,
is yes, but that's how it
the
was taught, right? Like we didn't talk about resiliency as kind of like Terry, what you were discussing these front loading pieces. Like resiliency, you just don't wake up resilient.
right.
Like
No.
resiliency is informed from the bullshit you've been through and your ability to keep going through it.
Mhm.
That's how it used to be presented, and that's not what it is.
Right.
That's
And I
yeah,
think it was very surface. And it reminds me of wearing an armor of like tin foil. And it's like,
yes,
oh, I took a 2-hour course and so now I'm resilient. And it's like it
yes,
doesn't work
no,
like that. It's built over time. It's your threshold, but it's your supports within that threshold and you're learning healthy coping
Yes.
mechanisms and, getting rid of some of the unhealthy ones. So I
Mhm.
just am very grateful that you said that, because I was like, I am not alone. I feel
Well,
seen.
I want to bring in, so I'm just kind of Googling it as we're talking, and there's different ways to define resiliency, and I'm just gonna say a few of them, and none of them sound like Gen X bootstrap stuff. Connectedness,
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
curiosity,
Mm.
communication, control. That is part of it. Learning control. Now, breath work will bring you some control,
Yep.
right, of body. Change acceptance, so
Yes.
not suffering, right? Clarity of focus, confidence, creativity.
Yeah, I taught none of that. I
I
taught
think we
none of
need,
that 15 years
yeah,
ago. That
the
wasn't
way that
part of
it's the way that it's packaged in the first responder world is very different. I think we need to rebrand resiliency. Let's
Uh-huh.
rebrand it.
Yeah, hey, that's a
Uh-huh.
great
Yes.
idea. Yeah. When you're teaching this, maybe you should rebrand resiliency,
Well,
you
even
know?
even
Just might
AK,
do
when you
that.
look at the first responder philosophy, the philosophy of first responding doesn't include many it doesn't include many of these things either. So I know I'm kind of enmeshing two different things here, right? But like, I mean, that's
Mhm.
something that was ingrained into my brain too, was the philosophy of what goes behind first responding. And we are not bringing communication and understanding and breath work and self boundaries into any of that shit. That's not part of the philosophy of first responding.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
but you're taught that, and it's ingrained. You've got your steps of first response, and that's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
But what
And I will
about,
say,
you know
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
oh, no, I was going to say something else, but it's really just me ranting. It's really not that it's really not
Well, I
that
will
important.
say, I think we're trying to change that for sure. I actually have an app, and on my app, there's a little SOS section for
Yeah.
people to grab a minute or a 2-minute breathing exercise. And I encourage people to do it in between calls. If you can sit in your
Yeah.
car for 60 seconds and
Yes.
breathe
Yes.
and get that little pocket of time to
Mhm.
recalibrate, y- take 60 seconds. If
Mhm.
nobody's,
Well,
in
do you
imminent
wanna know what's
danger.
weird? I just wanna say, you know what's weird?
What's
I
weird?
t it's so weird. I tell people about breathing all the time, about this style of breathing, slow exhaled breathing, because that slows your heart rate down, blah, 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 all this stuff. And, there's pushback to breath work, because I don't know if it seems too woo-woo to people, or I don't know what it is. But I tell them all the time, I'm like, "You know what? If you're sitting in a conference room or whatever, debriefing, whatever," I said, "You can breathe this way and nobody's gonna know.
Yeah.
Nobody will know that you are sitting there meditatively breathing, because you know what?
Yes.
Everyone in that goddamn room is breathing too, you know?
Well,
Mhm.
You're just doing it a little differently,
even
and
when
it's
you're
not like you have to go,
no, no.
and do all
Do
that
you
weird
do you
stuff."
find that, AK, I'm kind of curious on this because I'm wondering if you teach that to people at all in terms of the importance of, and I know that you do, so I'm like asking a question, I know you're gonna answer, so I just want you to elaborate, because I know the answer is yes. But this whole idea of the philosophy behind what we do when we're responding, right? And you're working with first responders, right? So and I can only speak for corrections, so if I'm way off on this, tell me. But we were taught the philosophy of arriving on a scene, right, and assessing your situations, and you enter the site, and if you got to, oh god, this is memory, right? Subject, stabilizing subject and scene, okay. Oh my god, I can't remember what I did yesterday, but this shit is ingrained in there. Oh my god, like there's a medical status you check, there's a long term, then you communicate, then you debrief. I don't know if I hit them
Oh,
all.
you're doing great.
Am I doing
This is
okay? Okay.
awesome.
Holy shit. Okay, but in there though was like there are other things that I think are missing,
Mhm.
because that's the whole piece of this, right? This is the philosophy is taught to do these robotic things, but like how come it's not, why aren't we inserting, even in an emergent situation, right? Where are we inserting any self-awareness or some breathing techniques, or when we arrive on the scene and assess the situation, like what are we all assessing for? Because I was always like, okay, I'm looking to see where everybody is, but at the same time, what's going on with me right now? Because things are kind of getting blurry, and I'm going to go jump in to try to
Mhm.
help somebody right now, and I really shouldn't be. That idea, I know it seems so far fetched. Even when I'm saying it, I feel like it's far fetched, but is it?
No. And
self-awareness part.
so we do have a little bit more of that in law enforcement, because when you're arriving on scene, you got to be ready for the bad guy to pop out from behind the bush and whatever. And so we're trained primarily on the range, to scan and breathe. So when
Oh,
you're
sure.
scanning, you're
Yes.
looking left, you're looking right, you're
Yep.
looking left, you're looking right. And
Yep.
so get a little bit of that bilateral stimulation. And I
Yeah.
highly
Yeah,
doubt
there
that
you
any of
go.
my instructors in 2008 knew that, but
Not that
that's
you've
what
done
we're doing.
EMDR.
Right.
No,
But
wait, hold on. So
yes,
this goes way back because my dad used to take me to the range and I would qualify with the guys on the force. Okay.
nice.
And we would
You're
do
so
that then. And
badass.
I
Who
was going to
are
say
you?
she's a secret
Who
badass.
are you? Like, I don't
secret
even know you. I
spy.
don't even know you. I can't even talk to you. I can't even look at your eyes.
International super spy.
Yeah. Super spy. Super spy. Exactly. And I didn't think it was as cool then as I do now, Anyway, but we would do that then because he would teach me how to breathe so that I could hit the target and
Yes.
and keep my, wits about me. And,
Yeah.
so that was in the 80s,
Yes. So it has that piece has been ingrained, and it comes from excuse me, being able to have a steady trigger finger.
Right.
So because when your adrenaline pumps, your body kind of shakes a little bit, and so it comes back to being able to get that sight alignment and maintain it and control the breath
And
and
not
slow
shoot the wrong
down
person.
and not shoot the wrong person. Right. So but then when we talk about tactically, getting on scene, and you scan and breathe and scan and breathe, and it's to avoid that tunnel vision. And
Sure.
so they teach that, but then they don't necessarily teach the why. And when you get a bunch of alpha control freaks, they kind of just dismiss it unless they
Sure.
know the why. And that's where I come in and I'm like, okay, this is why we need to do this. And so um there's a little bit more of it, I would say, in law enforcement than what you were
Yeah.
experiencing.
Yep.
Um, but I also teach people, reach out and touch the things around you, orient yourself, ground yourself in the space.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a matter of sitting down and saying, I see 5 red things and pointing them out. It doesn't have to be that
Yeah. Bring
thought
yourself
out.
to reality, though. Right.
It's
Yes.
just,
Like,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Or like stomp your foot on the ground for a
I
second.
say
Feel your
no.
foot.
I tell people
Yes.
know where your feet are. Where are your
Yeah.
feet?
Yeah.
And then suddenly you're
Yeah.
focusing on the bottom of your feet. It's
Right.
touching the
And
ground or it's cross-legged like mine,
Yeah.
like
And I
right.
think
Yeah.
that people have a misconception that it's going to interfere with their tactics, and it's going to bring them out of focus. But what it actually does is it draws your focus into the moment, and it
Yeah.
makes you more tactically sound because you're more aware of yourself and your
Yes.
surroundings.
Yes,
Mhm.
you're yourself. It's really your like that full-blown self-awareness. Like I wish that
Right.
those words were put into like all of the steps that, that we go through, because I think that one needs to be reframed over and over and over. You go in and you watch individuals who are part of this. And when you're like a third party bystander coming in and watching it, you see people almost gloss over. And that's scary as fuck because it's happening right in front of you. And you just watch the gloss and they come running, and they're ready. But it's like you see that pump, that adrenaline, they jump, and then there's just this gloss. I don't know how else to describe it. And it's very
Mhm.
scary. And
Yeah.
you watch footage later and you can just see the people kind of tap out because they kind of lose awareness, right? Of where they are. Where are your feet?
Mhm.
Where is your breath? What are you doing? And they just kind of and it's so scary. It's one of the hardest things for me when I left was I worry about the people I left behind.
Yeah.
And I think about that so much. When I stepped out of the institution for the very, very last time, I kept thinking, there's so much left here that I can't do anything about.
Yeah.
That's just such a hard, and I don't know if you experienced any of that when you just stepped away, but after you go through some of these emotions and you figure out who the fuck you are then, because you actually have to completely figure out who you are. You're the crispy burnout, right? That goes all the way down to not knowing who you are. And then when you go, oh my goodness, I left all of those things can stay back there, but the people are still there and still doing it, still
Mhm.
struggling with it.
I want to bring in a concept here
It's tough.
quickly. Okay, so Jen and I talk a lot about informed consent when it comes to treatments and things like that, right? So, and how informed consent is lacking because people get afraid. If I tell you the truth, then you might know something different or whatever. So, when you're describing like not telling them the why, because they're afraid it's going to seem woo woo or weird or soft or whatever, to me, that's like this weird layer of lack of informed consent. Like, why are you doing something or why are
Yes.
you not? And why aren't
Mhm.
we telling you why this could be important for you? Because we're afraid of how you're going to interpret that importance as being less than a man, less than, resilient, less than whatever. Like, I feel like you're going to explode right now. But
No, okay, so there's so many layers to this because I have always my entire life been like that annoying 5-year-old that's like, "Why? Why?
why?
But why?
Hmm.
But why?" Because I want to know. I don't wanna just blindly follow you.
Uh,
I maybe it's trust issues, I don't know, but I just don't wanna blindly follow people. I wanna know why. And when you're in a space like the first responder world or the military, you don't get the why
No.
Yeah. You're
because
not privy to it. Yeah.
you right, because your job is to listen. Your job is to show up and follow orders. And so I was always like my sergeants and lieutenants' worst nightmare because I was like, but why? 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 And I'm sure I drove them absolutely insane. But
Probably.
that is, but I feel, and this has been confirmed a lot, that there's a lot of people out there like me. And
Mhm.
when
Yeah.
I can share with them the why, then it starts clicking.
Why are we
And
so afraid to tell people the why? This is like with everything. Wh-
well, I think that people, at least in my industry, it seems that a lot of it comes off very soft, and
Mhm.
we don't have feelings, right? We have,
Right.
just a black
Yeah.
void and whatever. And it's not even about that. I think what I love to do is bring the science in behind it. I tell people, listen, feelings are just data and evidence from the body. We deal with data and evidence every single day.
Mhm.
It's, when your chest is tight, then that means that there's probably some anxiety going on, or maybe, but figure out what that means for you. Be a detective on yourself. And so when I can like bring in all the little buzzwords and make it sound not so woo woo, which by the way, I'm a very woo woo person. I'm
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
a Reiki. I'm a
Yeah.
Reiki master, and like,
Yeah.
but
No.
I
I'm like,
also
that's funny.
right.
You have to really like morph the words
I
there just to make
Yeah,
this.
but I also I can put a spin on it to where I'm not lying. I'm giving them the why.
Yes.
It's just it's in their language.
Yeah, I can
Yeah,
understand it. Well, that's how we have to
100%.
deliver everything, right? You gotta deliver to your audience something that they can resonate with.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I need to ask you the rest of the story. So after you got burnout, right?
Mhm.
Yep.
Like you were in your crispy burnout, did you end up oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Did I
Listen,
turn my
could
phone
everybody
down?
please turn their cell phones off during
Oh
this
my
podcast? Thank you.
god. So
Hello.
sorry.
Let's
Um,
answer
af
it.
Let's answer.
yeah.
Who is it? It's probably your husband.
Oh my god,
I'm
that would
in
be
the other
so
room, damn
funny.
it.
I'm some for here from here forward, I'm gonna start answering every phone call live on the podcast.
There you go.
Anyway, so after you got, you recognized, did you recognize your crispy burnout or did somebody else tell you you had it? Number 1. Number 2, what did you do about it?
What happened then?
Yeah.
Okay. So I started to slowly recognize it, but what had happened was, when I was recognizing it, I just was shaming myself about it. I was like, "Oh my god, you're such a piece of shit. You're such a loser. You should have never become a cop. You should have never blah blah." And so I just, threw myself into the black hole. Um, and so I didn't have a clear view of what was happening, but I knew that I didn't like it. And I started to really notice this like depersonalization where I was just
Mhm.
completely two different people. I was showing up at work, and, it was officer of the year. So everything was great on the outside, and nobody really knew outside of some little slip ups here and there. Um, my health was severely declining. Uh, I had to have my tonsils out at 25 or 26 years old, which is like unheard of.
Yeah.
And I had shingles twice before the time I was 30. So
Oh.
I was like, I had IBS like since I was a kid, but was flaring up really bad. So there was a lot going on. And finally so that summer, I met my now husband, and he started hanging around more, and he really liked the novelty of like, yeah, my girlfriend's a badass cop. Like, this is kind of
Right.
cool, right? Like, woo. And in very quick fashion, he realized that there was no novelty. Like, it was
Yeah.
all,
Yeah. Smoke and mirrors.
and yes,
Yeah.
um he started to kind of see that it wasn't what he thought it was. And he just looked at me one day and was like, you don't have to live like this. Like, you could change what you're doing. And I was like,
What?
what?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
No.
huh?
That's
No.
Um,
unimaginable.
I don't
right.
think so. Yeah.
And because I had formed my identity around that, right? Like, I
Right.
couldn't see any other way. I was so tunnel
Yes.
visioned into it. And I it it's a little bit of a long story. However, at one point I had a little bit of a meltdown thinking about going back to work, on a, what would have been my Sunday night. And I ended up going to the doctor the next day and saying, I need help. I can't do this anymore. They handed me like, basically no questions asked, handed me a prescription for an
I knew you were gonna
anti-anxiety.
say that.
And right, I never filled the prescription. I was like,
Yay.
"Fuck
Oh,
this."
yeah. It's scary.
Um, and
That's me.
but
That's my story. Yep.
Yep.
but
Mhm.
they also gave me 2 weeks off. So I was like, "Okay, that's my 2 weeks. I'm done." And
Ah,
I turned in my letter of resignation, and so after I left, I took about a month off to find another job. I had no plan, which was, oh
For
my
the first
god,
time, right?
right?
Yeah.
wow.
Mhm.
And uh, I turned into Rumpelstiltskin. I slept for about 18 hours a day, every single day for a month, because my adrenals were shot. Yes.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so I kind of had to recalibrate, and it still took months after that, but that was like my initial recalibration. And then I started to dive into, um, okay, let's control the controllables. Like, am I eating properly? Am I drinking too much? Am I getting any sleep? Because for a long time, I wasn't sleeping hardly at all,
Mhm.
um, which was adding to everything. So it was like kind of just little by little recalibrating lifestyle changes. And that's what I've learned over time is it's often not a big breakthrough. It's often just consistent, frequent, right decisions, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It takes a long time, but it's doable, and it doesn't require, here's your prescription.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
why
I
I
you
love you,
know
and that's why I'm so happy to be here, because I watch you guys, and I literally am in the background like, woo, 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 woo.
cheering us on. Yes.
Yes, yes. So,
Oh
You know,
yeah. We
your
we
story, like, in solidarity, like, seriously,
it's
because
very
that
similar.
was exactly my story of exit. That was my exit
mm,
as well. The only thing I did not do that you did that I wish I would have done is slept for days
Slept
upon
for
days.
yeah.
Yeah, I did not do
I
that.
was I was pissed. I had a to-do list a mile long, because
Right.
I had just
We
bought my
don't
house
let
a couple
ourselves
years
do that.
prior,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was so mad because I felt like I
Couldn't
couldn't
do it.
control it. I was like, I literally looked at my now husband, and I was like, "Do I have narcolepsy? Like, what is going on here?"
Mhm.
No.
And in hindsight, it all makes perfect sense now.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Now you're
what I caution people, if they leave or if they take some time off, um, your system kind of takes that as like, putting the e-brake on.
yeah.
And a lot of people take that as depression. And they're like,
Yes.
"Oh my god, I'm so depressed. I
Oh,
don't have a
Yeah.
purpose. I need to go back." And so retirement, medical leaves, things like that, they think, I'm so depressed. that I need to go back because that's where I feel fueled. And it's like, no, this is your body saying you need to rest from all the years that you were going over 100 miles an hour every single day, all day. And so I
Oh my
caution people
gosh.
there.
Or I'm
That is
so
such
depressed
a
that
good
I
point.
need more medication
Yes.
now, and
That
then
is
the
Yeah.
med
such a good
stacking
point.
begins,
Uh-huh.
so
Yes.
instead of just, I need to rest,
Mm.
restore,
Mhm.
and do if you're listening, AK just said the 4 pillars of mental health.
She did. She mentioned
She's
all
eat,
of them.
sleep, move, meditate.
Meditate.
All 4. These
All
are
4.
what I talk about,
Okay.
these all the time. I'm like,
I
"These
didn't
are
mean
your
to do that,
4
but
pillars."
You
Yes,
did. That's
you
like the
did.
base of like, oh my
Yeah,
God, the foundation of the shit that we do, even in like therapy and in brain health stuff that we do those
yeah.
4 things. Like
But when it comes
it's
out
not that it's
organically
actually
like
pretty
this,
simple.
yeah,
It's actually
well, that's the
pretty
thing.
simple,
We complicate the shit out of our mental health. Like,
right? We
when it
do.
is really, yes, the science and the brain stuff behind it is complex and interesting and intriguing and all this, but the solutions are
Yeah.
not that complicated.
yeah.
And the whole thing is, people they don't like to make the decisions that they know they need to make, right?
Yes.
Mm.
Like leaving a job. All 3 of us have done that. All 3 of us left the sure thing
Yep.
to do something else. And guess what, everybody? It all worked out.
Mhm.
Okay. And that's the message that I tell everybody. I'm like, you know what? Don't be so afraid, because everything always works out somehow, right? If it wasn't this, it would be something else, right?
Yeah.
But we're so afraid to leave relationships. We're so afraid to leave jobs, dirty jobs that don't serve us well. I think that's a bigger
Dirty
thing.
jobs,
Dirty
like
jobs. They are. They're
micro
dirty.
with
Don't
dirty
you be
jobs.
talking about my boyfriend, Mike. You better be talking nice about
Exactly.
him.
Those jobs might be kind of fun, actually, compared to what we've done. But anyway,
Yeah.
we're so afraid to make these big decisions. So then we go to the doctor I think we go to the doctor looking for validation of, maybe you should leave your job. Maybe you should leave your spouse. Maybe you should do
Right.
these things. But instead we get, maybe you should take this medication.
Mhm.
And then you can stay put and continue to traumatize yourself every
Yeah.
day, but you're so numb, you won't fucking know. Like, hey, right? Like, this seems like a great plan,
That on a
you know?
billboard. That was
Oh,
great.
yeah, that was a billboard. That's going on a deliverable. I'm writing
There
that one
you
That's
down.
got
go.
with your face doing that too. Like, oh my goodness. No,
You
but
gotta
you
go to
you
YouTube to see it.
you nailed it. The way what you just said, both of you, this
Yes.
recap you the last few minutes, that's the whole picture right there.
Yes.
It is. And you get to that phase where all your body was trying to do was fucking get back to homeostasis,
Yep.
but it didn't know how, right? It didn't know
Mhm.
how to do it. And it took months. I like that you said that
Yeah.
because it does.
Yeah.
It
And
does.
Years, sometimes years, by the way.
Yeah.
It's not a fast journey at all.
yeah. Oh yeah.
And
I mean,
by the way, we go in and out of it. Okay. So
yes.
once you hit burnout, we kind of vacillate in and out of this thing. But it's like the second time around, now though. Like,
Yeah.
this feeling is familiar. Oh no. Right. So for me, when it happens, I know what's happening, and I'm like, all right, this is the stuff I got to do now, compared to before, the avoidance, you know.
Well, and I think that's where, I burned out from full-time law enforcement, and I went right into a job getting a whole lot of secondary trauma. So it was a full-time job. I was just, oh, you will just wait.
It's
I was still
familiar.
a commissioned law enforcement officer. So I still had to put in my hours. I was still, or I'm sorry, I was getting a master's degree. I was
Yeah.
planning a wedding. I was going through a 10-month yoga teacher training. In that realm of time, I had a miscarriage. I had a baby. So I never slowed down.
Mhm.
My body was primed and conditioned to go, 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 go. And it
Mhm.
wasn't the job, it was the speed at which I was going, because when I was bored, I had all of these plates spinning and I was like, what else can I do? I need more certifications. I need to become a Reiki
Oh my god, I
master.
think
Like,
you're
I need,
me, actually.
right? Yes. And so, yeah. And so what I realized was that's when I really started to do a lot of introspection and say, it's me. It wasn't the job certainly added to it, but it was me. And that's where the yoga instructing and the meditation and all of that introspection. And I was like, oh, and that's when I started to go, what happened before the job? And what I didn't share with y'all is when I was 17, 2 years before I started my career, I lost my lifelong best friend to suicide.
Mm.
And I had some other things in my childhood as well, but that one, and
Mhm.
I stayed numb. I lost an entire summer's worth of memory.
Mhm.
And so I was just floating on that same track. And I think that so many first responders come into the job without a blank slate and they think it's a reset, and it's
Yeah.
not.
Well, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your most vulnerable things with us. I hope that our listeners could resonate with this type A sandwich that we have going on here, the control freak sandwich, yay, and the thin blue line. So make sure everyone likes and follows us across all social media. Send us your gaslit stories at the Gaslit Truth Podcast at gmail.com. And that is a wrap.
Yeah.